The governor and I, and we were all doing a tour of the library here, and talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs. And there is such great significance to the passage of time when we think about a day in the life of our children.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Conch Republic. In the last episode, we were talking mostly about fractal foreshadowing. In this episode, we're going to talk about narrative reincarnation. And I don't know how long I'm going to go on this. It could be very short, or it might be, a 45-minute piece like the other 3. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Fractal foreshadowing is the idea that before each season, the micro season that is the same season as the large season is a model of what the large season is going to be narratively. An example of this is one that we've been using for the last 3 episodes, where we've been referring to the summer right here. Actually, let me draw this. The summer of spring as a model of the summer saeculum. And I decided that it would be useful to make a small diagram showing this without all this other information on it. So here it is. We have, I'm going to move myself around a little bit. So the idea is that this arc here, which I will draw, this arc here would be spring. And this, as you can see right here, is summer. So meta-saeculum. And in the spring saeculum that precedes the summer saeculum, you're going to have a summer generation. Now, that summer generation, that little slice of the pie, is a model for the events that are going to happen in the summer saeculum. So it's a fractal in miniature of this larger fractal that is going to mirror it. And what I've seen, and you can explore this for yourself if you get a copy of the map, is each one of these 5-year periods maps to, so this is a 5-year period in the 20-year summer generation, is going to map to a 20-year period in the summer meta. And I think that there's a special amount of similarity, especially if it's the summer generation in the season before the summer saeculum. The small season coming before the next large season is going to be a model. And I know that I'm repeating myself, but this is important when you're teaching anything. You have to repeat, because repetition is what makes us remember. So, small season, large season. As you go into the next one, what would be the generation that's going to be the thematic model, the fractic model, that's going to foreshadow this season here, which is in autumn? Well, you would look to the autumn here as the model for what's going to go on here. And then in the autumn saeculum, you would look to the winter generation as the model for what was going to happen in the winter saeculum. And it keeps going. And of course, you can find other relationships. For example, if you go down to the summer generation in winter, you will find a dialectical relationship with the summer of summer. However, it's not going to be as similar, from what I've seen, to the themes here as this one is going to be. These 5-year periods seem to have a very close correlation to these larger periods here when you look on the map. And one example that I referred to in episode 3 was the one about the Vietnam War, which had its peak between 1970 and 1975, which would be the autumn of summer of spring. I know that's really going a few levels deep, but it makes sense when you actually look at the map, because what we have, let me bring this up again, is this is 60 to 65, 65 to 70, 70 to 75. This would be an autumn. And this was where we were at war indirectly with the Chinese and with the people of a French colony. So this is an autumn of summer. So you have a micro autumn right here of summer. And you have the West at war with a French colony. Now, if we go to the large summer, you have the autumn, and we're at war with the French. And as I was saying as well, it would be interesting to look into Indian reservations and their creation in the United States after 1970, between 1970 and 1975. I'd be very interested to see what occurred there. And I probably will look more into that in a future episode. Nevertheless, that is a recapitulation of the idea of fractal foreshadowing, is that these seasons are going to, or these generations are going to be fractal maps for the larger seasons. And I'm sure that if you could go out even further, if we had a different way of orienting this map, that we would also find other correlations. So, okay. Now, there is also the idea of narrative reincarnation. So what is that? This just sounds totally crazy, right? Well, when you discover a new way of looking at something, what is necessary in order to talk about it is to create an observation language. And so I've taken it upon myself and some friends of mine with me to come up with some terms so that we can at least be intelligible when we're noticing patterns. And this is not because we think we're so great. We're just very thankful to have discovered this interesting way of orienting narrative elements on a timeline that is cyclical. And we've seen some patterns, and so you have to name them in order to talk about them. And so this one, since it seems to be pretty consistent, we're calling narrative reincarnation. Now, why is that? Well, it's not like ontological reincarnation, where the soul spark or the divine part of a person gets put into a new creature. It's not like that. This is more like teleological reincarnation, where it doesn't have to be the same person, or that language is weird actually. It doesn't have to be the same being that existed before at another place in another time. It can be a totally new being that is simply acting out the same narrative script that was acted out before, but it's going to be a peculiar script because it's not just scripts that apply to anyone and everyone at all times. These will be peculiar scripts that will only be occurring in a certain place or a certain time or under certain circumstances. So, as I was saying, and I'm going to bring my face down now. As I was saying, if you look at Queen Elizabeth I and II, they are both in the same place on the map. So you have Queen Elizabeth I over here, and I think she might even be a little bit earlier. Nevertheless, she's key during the Armada Crisis, and she goes through Merry England, and I don't remember when she dies. However, this is a really active portion for Queen Elizabeth I. Now, it just so happens that there is an intersaecular parallel, and we're going in the same direction, and that, right? Same direction, and another Queen Elizabeth is here. And this is Queen Elizabeth II. And so this would be a narrative reincarnation. There's also, I believe, a Trump James II fractal reincarnation over here. If you look into James II and you compare him to Donald Trump, they're very, very similar characters. Now, one example that showed up for me this week had to do with the many worlds interpretation. I was wandering around YouTube and I came on a clip from Joe Rogan's podcast where he was interviewing Sean Carroll. And I've been looking into a few different books by Sean Carroll because I'm very interested in how time works and how information theory works through time. So I was looking for videos of Sean Carroll talking about his ideas, and the theory of many worlds showed up, or the many worlds interpretation. I'm not sure what exactly the official term is for it, but I thought, well, that's interesting. What if I look on the map? I know that Leibniz had that line about the best of all possible worlds, and I know Voltaire was making fun of Leibniz's idea in Candide. And I wondered what would happen if I orient these different ideas on the map. Where are they going to show up? And so what I found is that over here, actually I believe it's 1957 officially when the many worlds interpretation shows up in physics. So what exactly is going on here? I'm going to let Sean Carroll explain with a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast.
Okay, so hit us with this many worlds theory.
Okay, so think about this electron. You say that it could be either spin up or spin down. It's a combination of both. That's its wave function. You measure it, you only ever see spin up or spin down. So Copenhagen says that's because the wave function suddenly changed, snapped into place when you observed it. Don't ask me what it means to observe something. That's not what Copenhagen lets you ask.
Okay.
Many world says what you're missing is two things. Number one, you're a quantum system. You're obeying the rules of quantum mechanics. You're made of atoms and electrons and so forth. You have a wave function too, okay? So you're secretly treating yourself as a classical thing when you make that measurement, but you really should be treating yourself quantum mechanically, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is something that Einstein invented, namely called entanglement. When quantum mechanics says there's a wave function for a system, it doesn't say there's a separate wave function for every particle, right? It says that there's only one wave function for the whole universe. So the way I like to say it is, imagine two particles come in and bounce off of each other. Either one has a wave function, and it's unpredictable exactly what angle it's going to go off at. So both of the particles that go off, you don't know where they're going. But because momentum is conserved, if they came in at equal velocities, they'll go out at equal velocities and in opposite directions. If you measure one, then you know where the other one is going, right? That's entanglement. The observed state of one system can be related to the observed state of another system. So those are the two ingredients. You're a quantum system, and quantum systems can be entangled with each other. So Hugh Everett, who was a graduate student when he invented this idea in the 1950s, said, look, when you measure that electron, what happens physically? Like, forget about you're a person, you're conscious, all of that BS. Like, you're a physical system, you obey the Schrodinger equation. You are a quantum mechanical system, you obey the laws of physics. So you look at the electron, your wave function changes. It used to be you're just a person doing whatever you do, but then after you look at the electron, you become entangled with it. And it splits. So there is one part of the wave function that says the electron was spinning clockwise and you measured it spinning clockwise. And there's another part of the wave function that says the electron was spinning counterclockwise and you saw it spinning counterclockwise. Now, everybody knows this. Like that far, it's not controversial at all. That's clearly the prediction of the equations of quantum mechanics. But everyone else said, well, that means that I'm some weird combination of I saw it spinning one way and I saw it spinning the other way, but I've never felt that way. When I look at real electrons, I see them one way or the other. That can't be right. That can't be the final answer. The wave function must somehow collapse. And Everett said, no, what you're missing is there's now two separate worlds. Both of those part of the wave function are real, but they're different worlds. They will never interact with each other again. What happens in one part of the wave function will not affect what happens in the other part. So now there's a version of you that saw the electron spinning clockwise, and there's another version of you that saw it spinning counterclockwise. And that's just taking seriously the prediction of quantum mechanics. It's not adding any extra stuff, any extra worlds, anything like that.
That is the part where my brain broke.
Now, this idea is introduced apparently in 1952. And again, it's published in 1957, and then I believe by 1970 it's being discussed quite a bit until about 1990, which is here when it receives some pretty strong criticism and is definitely not as popular, at least from what I can see on the Wikipedia page. Now, Sean Carroll seems to be bringing this idea back in the past few years. And it's interesting because you have this many worlds interpretation coming to the fore right here in a very much summer of spring area. There's some overlap, of course. And then you have this many worlds idea being recapitulated up here. And so when I was looking on the map and I was thinking of Leibniz, I wanted to know, when did he publish his book about many worlds, the possibility of many worlds? And it turns out he published that in 1710. 1704 is this line, because this is the beginning of the Augustan Age for the summer saeculum. Now, 1710 is going to be about right here. And as I was saying, the summer generation is going to be a fractal map of the summer season, or the summer saeculum. So it's interesting to me that you get, even with philosophy and a particular philosopher and a particular theory of philosophy, you still get these correspondences where this season is a fractal expression or macro of this season here. They're both summers. It's just one is a summer generation. and one is a summer saeculum. So when we go back to this diagram over here, what you see is summer generation in mini has spring of summer generation, summer of summer generation, autumn of summer generation, winter of summer generation. And the same rules apply, that the spring is going to be the high of the summer, and then the summer of the summer generation is going to have an awakening. It's going to be the most awakening part of this awakening. The autumn will begin a disintegration, and then the winter will have crisis. So you can do this again with any kind of information. You can locate it on the map, find out where did it take place. If it's a theory of physics, what are the dates when it was published? When did people start working on it? When was it considered irrelevant or false? You locate those dates on the meta, and then you find the correspondences. So you would find cross-saecular contrasts. You would find intersaecular parallels. And then you would find a fractal foreshadowing. And if you find these things, you will come to a very interesting understanding of whatever topic. And the correspondences are there. I do this every day, all week. Any kind of historical or narrative information, I will locate it in the map and I can find something. So that's narrative reincarnation. You could also say that Sean Carroll is being a kind of narrative reincarnation of Leibniz. And I've pulled up some information here. So, Best of All Possible Worlds, coined by German polymath and Enlightenment philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, in his 1710 work, Essays of Theodicy on the Goodness of God, the Freedom of Man, and the Origin of Evil. So, that's 1710. Now, you have Many Worlds interpretation, originated in Everett's Princeton PhD thesis, The Theory of the Universal Wave Function. The universal wave function, introduced by Hugh Everett, is his PhD thesis, The Theory of the Universal Wave Function. It informs a core concept in the relative state interpretation or many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Okay. Now, what I found to be most interesting about this little section here was this that I highlighted. Schrödinger subscribed to a kind of post-Machian neutral monism. Neutral monism is an umbrella term for a class of metaphysical theories in the philosophy of mind. These theories reject the dichotomy of mind and matter, believing the fundamental nature of reality to be neither mental nor physical. In other words, it is neutral, in which matter and mind are only different aspects or arrangements of the same common elements. Treating the wave function as physical and treating it as information became interchangeable. Now, in future episodes, I want to do more in exploring the patterns of information, and particularly with things like the Mandelbrot set and bifurcation theory, and other things like those two large ideas. Information just does move in waves. And if all of the things in the world are inherently information, then they're always going to have wave arrangements to them, including human action and interaction with other non-human things. It's still going to obey, I'll call it wave functions, or perhaps the physics of waves, and the patterns that we're able to draw out of large collections of information with tools like information theory. This map right here is waves of information. You have 4 waves of information, and they have subwaves, but they're also part of larger waves. And this is also like music. So there's something here, and I will not pretend like I know. I'm even scratching the surface of what it is. But there is something here where narrative information is arranging itself according to the laws of how waves work. These are information waves. And I think that you could take all the information off of this map and just put in the math for these different colors and for this cycle, and you would be able to mathematically pinpoint the fractals and point out their relationships. You could do that. I'm sure you can. I don't know the math, but I'll find somebody who does. And I'm sure that those things are in this map. You can make a fractal version of this, figure out the mathematical equations, and then you would be able to predict even more detail where things are going to be in the past and probably in the future. So some other cool things that I saw this week were some new colors for Omega watches, which made me think about all the new colors that Apple made available in just the past 2 years for their iPhones and for their iMac computers. And this was very interesting because it seemed that after 2000 to 2005, when we had all the really pretty new iMacs, everything became black and white for about 15 years. And in my opinion, very boring. But if you were to take a meta-saecular interpretation of that design era, what you would be seeing is that there was a little spring of winter when you had color. But then after that was over, you didn't really have color anymore. All the design was just this black and white, cold, Bauhausian type of design. But when you get to the beginning of spring for the new saeculum, you are going to get a bloom of color again. And so you see it even in these very representative brands bringing color back. And Apple is one, Omega is another, but there are many others. And I'm sure that it's even going to be happening much more in cars, in clothing, in movies. There's going to be an explosion of creative color that aligns with this spring. And so we're having a spring. You have the minor spring of the spring season in the awakening saeculum. And so that's going to be very interesting to witness. There are also things, and I won't pull these up, you can look them up, where in the 70s we had a series of gas crises along with high meat prices. You can look those up. And then this is not so directly related to the summer of spring, aside from there being a lot of basically homesteads and communes in the 60s, but it's decentralized food, which I think will follow the summer trend of populism, because summers are very populist. The summer saeculum, we can imagine, is going to have an a strong overarching theme of populism and decentralization. So anything that's been centralized, you can bet on the prevalence of decentralized versions of that centralized thing. Now, I wanted to add one more image that I came across this week. Actually, it wasn't an image. It's a screenshot I took. I was looking into Elliott waves and Fibonacci trading for cryptocurrencies and stocks and other things. And I saw this channel where the man who was making the videos had this line that had to do with predicting the past as an example of how you can also predict the future. And it's just like in physics. Apparently, the physics that we use in order to talk about time or to equate about time, the time equations that we use work in both directions. And what I've seen on this map is that these patterns, the cross-saecular contrasts, the inter-saecular parallels, the fractal foreshadowing, the narrative reincarnation, that's things that you really have to do more research into yourself. But these first three patterns are very consistent and they work in both directions. So you can predict the past. Your ignorance of the past is the same as your ignorance of the future, except that you have more faith that the past actually happened than you do that the future is going to happen. So you can take that belief and you can retroject it, or the pattern rather. You can take the information and you can say, I know that if I look across the wheel, I'm going to find something similar. However, it's going to be, of course, subject to the season and larger seasons that information is a part of. So you may have your consciousness revolution up here, and then you may have your transcendental awakening down here. And you'll see, okay, well, it's in a meta spring, so it's restorative. And okay, the transcendental awakening is in an autumn, so it's going to be disintegrative. So you have consciousness awakening, but it's disintegrative. It's individualistic instead of communal, which it is over here. So these are patterns that work backwards and forwards. You want to learn them and make them a regular part of your historical framing. If you can frame history in a cyclical fashion, you don't need to wed yourself to certain grand narratives. There's a large trend in trying to get rid of all grand narratives. And my opinion is that some grand narratives do need to go, but not all grand narratives. This grand narrative of cyclical time, it's not even so much a grand narrative as it's just a healthier way, a non-destinational way of looking at events through time. We don't have to always think that every complete conflict cycle is the end of the world. This is the very materially apocalyptic way of interpreting history. No, an alternate to this, an alternative, is to look at the end of a conflict cycle as the end of a narrative world. It's not the end of a physical world. It's an end of a narrative world. And it may include the end of certain physical structures that were made possible by the narrative world. But it doesn't mean that the physical world is ending. It means that the narrative world is ending. And this is a much healthier way of thinking about history, in my opinion. It makes you way less unnecessarily apocalyptic. So, and also way more hopeful. And I think that based on what is in this map, there is a lot to be hopeful for. We have an Augustan age coming up. We have a huge awakening season. Life is only going to get better. And if anything is being very crazy right now, in my opinion, it's because the institutions that were built on the narrative ideas in this saeculum, which were made possible by the outcome of World War II. These ideas and institutions are in their death throes right now. So in any ways in which they're going crazy, it's because they're dying. They're squirming on their deathbed, and something new is coming. And it's going to have a very strong awakening character. It's going to have a bloom of awakening for the next 20 years. And then in 2040 to 2060, you're going to have the next great awakening. And so that's something that we can look forward to. I'm very confident of it just by looking a few layers back in the map. And we are witnessing now another layer being formed, which is very exciting. So that is my short video on narrative reincarnation. Next week, I will explore some thoughts on temporal cartography and geo-saecular poetics, which is another way of saying that it turns out certain events happen in certain places and very consistently. And that's interesting. We should look into it, and we will. So thank you for watching. If you would like to support the broadcast, you can go to themapmaker.gumroad.com. You can buy this map along with this map. I will also add this image here to the broadcast. So when you subscribe to the broadcast, you will also get this fractal foreshadowing narrative reincarnation diagram that can help. And you can orient this thing around the map. It's kind of a stencil that can show you useful patterns. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, turn on the bell notification so that you can watch all the episodes. I will see you in the next one. Thank you.